All right, hey everybody, welcome back. Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 6th of May, and we're about ready to get going for our morning intro to philosophy class here at Chapman from 9 to 9:50. So welcome to you guys that are getting here to the live chat. I'll be right back. I'm just going to grab my book. Okay. I'm a big fan of iced coffee, especially now that it's hot, so that's what I'm drinking. Hope you guys are doing good. Hopefully your other classes are shaping up in good order for the end of the semester. Is it cold brew? It actually, I think, is cold brew. It's, it's purchased in the bottle, and then I add ice on top of it. Yeah, so it's in the fridge. It's cold brew. It's kind of sweetened a little bit, so it's not just like black coffee. It's got, I don't know, some type of like vanilla latte type of flavor going on. It's good. Cool. Just another minute or so, and then we'll be ready to go. Good morning. Hey there, Emily. Maybe. She's over there doing something off to the side. Okay, guys. Well, hello again. Good morning to everybody. Welcome back to class. So we just have a few more lectures before we start getting prepared for the final exam. Everybody knows that your essays are due Monday, so make sure you're trying to work on those a little bit. And we just have these last 3 meetings where we're going to go over essays from the book. So today, Friday, Monday, and then next Wednesday and Friday, it's just 2 review sessions, and then upcoming after that is the final on the Tuesday the 19th. So yeah, let's go ahead and resume where we were at. Basically, now we're on to the last, hi Logan, now we're on to the last topic in the class, which is life, the value of life, what makes a human life go well, life and death, pretty much. And we're examining different philosophical accounts of what makes a human life go well. So the first author on this that we're looking over is the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. And we're evaluating a part of his famous book called The Republic. In our textbook, they've just titled it On the Harmony of the Soul. So we were just trying to give you guys the big breakdown of what Plato's view is about what would make a human life go as well as possible. So he starts off by just talking about what the ideal state would be, what the ideal form of society would be according to his, rational intuition. And if you remember that, the idea was that there are these three major parts of the Republic. The Republic is just his phrase or term for this utopian-style society, this ideal, perfect society. So there were three parts to the Republic, different functions, different obligations and responsibilities within the Republic. So the merchants are basically the working people who produce goods and services which are traded for profit. Hi, Ella. And that's the largest share of society. That's the biggest portion of the population. Then you have the warriors, which are, hey Trevor, which are tasked with the duty to provide defense and security for the Republic. That's kind of like police and military. And then you have the kings, which are the leadership class, the heads of state, people who call the military into service when needed, and those who set the policies. So that's like the equivalent of the political leadership class, and those are the kings. Now, we talked about this sort of very sophisticated system which Plato envisioned, according to which people would be divided into the different compartments of society based on their aptitudes. So if you had not done so well in your schooling, I guess, or on your major tests, at the end of your primary education, then you go into the warriors. If you did pass that major exam, but you failed the second one, then you would become a merchant. And if you went all the way through your education to the position of political power, becoming a king is not done by means of a democratic election, but this kind of educational academic procedure and process. Now, there was also the idea that each of the three parts of the Republic had a virtue which was unique to them. That is a quality that a thing would have in order to do its job or its function at a high level very well. So the merchants, whose job is to produce goods and services for profit, the virtue that is associated with that group is temperance, meaning you have moderation and self-control over your desires, that you don't get carried away with greed, basically. The warriors, to be good warriors that can fight capably and defend the nation and so on, have to have courage. That's the willingness to face danger when it's needed. And then the kings, the all-important leaders of the group, of the society, they should have wisdom, because wisdom is the kind of intellectual capacity that gives you the ability to make good decisions and so on. So when each three parts of the Republic are doing their job, not trying to do the job of other parts, when they're operating according to their virtue, and when the lower parts are not trying to overthrow the king, but rather peacefully submitting to his rule, then you have a republic that's flourishing and is a just and well-ordered society. Now from there, this whole background about the republic is used as a way to justify what the ideal human life would be as an individual. So that's where we left off last time. I was about to describe to you guys the analogy that Plato is going to give between the ideal government or society. I should say society because it's not just government. Some of the people in the republic, of course, don't work within the kings and stuff. But the ideal society, that is used as a sort of template for the ideal individual human life. Because again, Plato thought that the human individual, me and you, for example, are just like a little miniature version of a state. And so there are some structural similarities that carry over from the picture he gives of the state to the characterization he gives of the soul. Okay, so he says there's three parts to the human soul. And now what I hope you see is that there's a parallelism being mentioned here between the features of the state and features of the soul. So just like there were 3 parts of the state, there's 3 parts of the human soul, and they're pretty much similar to the 3 parts of the state. So here's the next point from Plato. 3 parts of the human soul. So the Greeks believed that we do have a soul, that we have like an immortal soul, and that's a view that, is in common with major world religions, like monotheistic major world religions, Christianity, Islam, and all of that. So there is a belief in the soul. And the belief of the Greek idea of the soul is that it's divided into different parts. So let's go over what those 3 parts are. First of all, one part of the soul is called the appetitive part. The appetitive part of your soul. Okay, so that's the part of your soul that that has desires for things that it wants. So as the word kind of indicates, it's about having appetites. And we don't just mean appetites for like literally food, although that's one possibility. It's desires and appetites for whatever it is that you're seeking, whatever it is that you want. So they could be experiences, they could be specific types of relationships, they could be certain types of possessions. But the part within you that yearns for things, that wants to have those things, whatever they may be, that's the appetitive part of your soul. That's the part with desire, with the yearning to acquire certain things that you do not yet have. That's one major part of your soul. And this is supposed to be, I'm going to put above this in parentheses the part of the Republic that is supposed to be compared with, just so that you know. But the parenthetical mention here is not the part of the soul. It's just keep that clear in your mind, that it's just the part of the state that's supposed to be related to. So the appetitive part of the soul is kind of like those merchants. Because the merchant class within the Republic is the part that wants to make money and profit. So it's kind of, you got to think about it in an extended sense. But the desire for the increase in wealth and profit is much similar to the desire that one has with regard to their appetites generally. So the one part of your soul that corresponds with the merchants is the appetitive aspect of you. Okay, now another part of your soul is what he calls the spirited part of the soul. And that part of the soul, so first I'll explain what it's all about. The spirited part of your soul is the part that has passion and pride, and it's competitive. It does not like to be disrespected, and it's got a lot of a sense of honor. So it's the part of you that likes to demonstrate skill, that likes to compete and win, that hates to be disrespected. It's the part of you that would fight, perhaps, if needed, to defend yourself or important values or perhaps other people that you value. So it's kind of like the warrior part of the society. If you compete athletically and you're out there, on the sporting field, the spirited part of you that wants to come out successfully as the victorious team, that's the spirited part of you. That's not about like a desire for possessions, but rather the exhibition of your ability in contrast to others. So it's a prideful, passionate, competitive aspect of your soul. Okay, so that's the second part, the spirited. And then the third, which basically equates to the kings in the Republic, that's the rational part of your soul. And that's like the kings. Why? Because the rational part of you is basically the intelligent part of your being, of your soul. It's the inner voice within you that makes good decisions without bias, without passion, without being overwhelmed by short-sighted judgment or desires. So it's the intelligent part, the smart part, the part that should be making good decisions because it's careful and calculating and rational. So that's like the kings, because the kings are the ones who make all the decisions that order the direction of the society and that lead it on. So that's the rational part of you, which stands equivalent to those kings. Now, we said there's a virtue of each of the 3 parts of the Republic, and the same virtue applies to each of the 3 parts of the human soul. So the virtue of the appetitive part is temperance. And just as before, the virtue of the spirited part, just as with the warriors, is courage. And the virtue of your rational part is to have wisdom. So what he's saying that a description of what would make the ideal human life. So what he says is this: basically, if you want your life to go as well as it could, make sure that each of the three parts of your soul are doing their job appropriately according to their virtue, and not trying to overstep their bounds and do the work of the other parts of the soul. So allow your appetitive part to seek out the things that it desires, but do so with moderation and self-control, temperance. Don't basically let your desires make you become greedy or overwhelmed by the incentive to seek out the things that you want. Sometimes when people have overly aggressive desires that they cannot rationally turn back, they end up doing unwise, foolish, and self-harmful things. So it's good to have appetites, and it's good to want things, whether it's experiences, money, types of relationships, types of possessions. It's a fine thing to want those things and to seek them and pursue them, but to do so with moderation is key. So that's one thing. And then your spirited part, the part of you that would like to compete, win, is willing to fight if it needs to, has a lot of pride. That part of you also has an important role to play, but it needs to have courage. Courage meaning that it's not too afraid to be exhibited when the conditions are proper and when it's needed. So that's your spirited part. Call it into duty when it's right and necessary, and if you have courage, then it'll be ready to act. And then the rational part of you is all important. That's the one that should lead you, basically. Just like the kings lead the republic, the rational part of you should be like the little king or whatever within you. That's the voice, the intellectual voice, which is best able to make all important decisions about what you're going to do and how you ought to act. So you should listen to your reason. You should defer your decision-making to the counsel of your reason. And as long as you let reason rule within you, and the other parts of your soul willfully submit to your reason, then you're going to live a good human life. That's what a just and well-ordered human life is. So when he talks about the harmony of the soul, he's talking about getting the parts of your soul into the proper balance so that they all complement each other, do their own job, and do it according to the virtue which is unique to that part. Let me read a little bit about what he says here, and then you can kind of see his own way of putting it. You're basically trying to harmonize and balance the different component parts of your soul. But what would be a bad human life? Here's what he thinks would not be so good. When your life's not going well, it's when the parts of the soul that you have are becoming out of order, like when the lower parts of the soul become too strong, and when they take leadership over the reason and rationality within you, now your life's not going so well. When the parts of your soul try to do the job of other parts, your life's not going so well. So when there's an imbalance, when they're bleeding over into the responsibilities of the other aspects of the soul, now your soul's out of harmony, not properly balanced, and that will lead you into bad behavior that's going to be both bad for you and for everybody else. So you should try to strive for this type of harmonization and balance within the parts of your soul, and that's what would make your life go well. So that's what Plato thinks. And let me read here the discussion that's going on in the text between Socrates and Plato's brother Glaucon. So he says, here he's just talking about the parts of the soul in comparison to the state. So he says, isn't the individual... Let me start right at the beginning on 743. He says, we've made our difficult way through a sea of argument, and we are pretty much agreed that the same number and the same kind of classes as in the city are also in the soul of each individual. Glaucon says, that's true. Plato continues, therefore it necessarily follows that the individual is wise in the same way and in the same part of himself as the city. That's right. And isn't the individual courageous in the same way and in the same part of himself as the city? And isn't everything else that has to do with virtue the same in both, necessarily? Moreover, Glaucon, I suppose we'll say that a man is just in the same way as the city, and that too is entirely necessary. And we have not forgotten that the city was just because each of the three classes in it was doing its own work. I don't think we could forget that. then we must also remember that each one of us in whom each part is doing its own work will himself be just and do his own. Glaucon says, of course we must. So therefore, Socrates adds, isn't it appropriate for the rational part to rule, since it is really wise and exercises foresight on behalf of the whole soul, and for the spirited part to obey it and be its ally? And it certainly is, says Glaucon. And then going down a little bit, and isn't it, as we are saying, a mixture of music, poetry, and physical training that makes the two parts harmonious, stretching and nurturing the rational part with fine words and learning, and relaxing the other part through soothing stories and making it gentle by means of harmony and rhythm? Yes. And these two, having been nurtured in this way, and having truly learned their own roles and been educated in them, will govern the appetitive part, which is the largest part in each person's soul and is by nature the most insatiable for money. They'll watch over it to see that it is not filled with the so-called pleasures of the body, and that it does not become so big and strong that it no longer does its own work, but attempts to enslave and rule over the classes it is not fit to rule, thereby overturning everyone's whole life. But basically what he's saying there is that the appetitive part kind of has to be held in check by the other two parts of the soul. The rational component is capable of ordering into service the spirited part of you, just like the king of a society can compel the warriors to act on its behalf. And so just to make sure that the appetitive part doesn't become insatiable with greed, they sometimes have to be curbed by the joint action of the other two parts. And he says, wouldn't those two parts, the rational and spirited, do the finest job of guarding the whole soul and body against external enemies, reason by planning, spirit by fighting, following its leader and carrying out the leader's decisions through courage? He says, yes, that's true. And it is because of the spirited part that we call a person courageous, when it perseveres through pain and pleasure the declarations of reason about what is to be feared and what is not. And we will call him wise because of that small part of himself that rules in him and makes those declarations and has within it the knowledge of what is advantageous for each part and for the whole soul, which is the community of all three parts. So, just a little more. Isn't he moderate because of the friendly and harmonious relations between these same parts? Namely, when the ruler and the ruled believe in common that the rational part should rule, and they do not engage in civil war against it. So basically, as with the Republic, it's not, so in a well-ordered society, we should not have a military coup where the military tries to overtake the king. Same with you. In your life, you should not allow your passions to overwhelm your better judgment. You should not allow your desires and your appetites to overthrow the wise decisions that your reason would make. And when you do those kinds of things, when you allow the lower parts of your soul to gain power over your reason, you start to behave badly and your life is not going as well. So he says that the ruler and the ruled should believe in common that the rational part should rule and do not engage in war against it. And a person will be just because of what we've mentioned and in that way. So he says, that's what justice is. Now I want to add some more because he talks a little bit more from here. He says, imagine that a person had achieved this type of proper balance and harmony among the elements of their soul. So they've got rationality ruling and running a show, and the lower parts doing their job according to their virtue, but that's it, not trying to do more or do the work of other parts. He says that if that's the way your soul is, then you're going to lead a course of behavior that's very noble and righteous. But when you do unjust things that are bad and unhealthy for you and other people, the reason you're doing that is because of an imbalance among the parts of your soul. So imbalance and disharmony among these different elements of the soul is what leads to vicious and unjust behavior. So like, for example, would a person who had the proper kind of balance being spoken of here ever steal? No. If you stole something that does not belong to you, which of course people will in some cases do, or commit fraud, or all kinds of ways that they try and game the system for their benefit. If a person stole things, which part of their soul is stepping out of line and becoming too powerful? Let me ask you that question and see what you think. The act of theft. What would that come from? Which part of the soul? And why? Just tell me. Let me know. Go ahead. It's an easy question. If a person committed It's theft. Yes, exactly. It's the appetitive part, right? Because the appetitive part is the part that wants things. It has desires for the things it doesn't have. So if you had appetites that were so strong that you said, you know what, I'm just going to take that thing, forget about earning money to have it, or, you know, getting a legal or permissible transfer of possession over to me through a gift or whatever. You're just going to take it and violate those established practices and rules. And Marissa, that's what you say too, appetitive, because it pushes your desire too far and you steal the thing. Exactly. Now, when a person steals, if they ever come to recognize the error of their ways, they say, well, you know what, I acted against my better judgment. I wanted it so bad that I lapsed into bad behavior and I committed theft. But theft is not a good thing and it's not just. So when you do a bad thing like stealing, it's not because your wisdom inside of you is saying, yes, the rational and wise thing is to steal. Your rationality knows that's not the best choice and that that's poorly judged action. But it is your appetites that are telling you, forget what's smart and wise. Just take it because you want it. So, you know, bad and vicious behavior that could get you and other people into trouble and that could create an unstable society and provide for a bad individual life. They come from the type of imbalance and disharmony that he's saying we should not have. Let me give you another example. What about if somebody cut you off on the road, and just because of that little slight, you know, that they didn't show you more courtesy in the way you were driving, you became so irate and angry that you followed this motorist with your car until finally they parked, and then you got out of your car and just beat them silly, okay? So we're talking about assault from road rage. This is probably, I hope you agree, not the right thing to do, and it's probably not best for you or for anybody. But it also isn't the way that a just and harmonized soul would act. Which part of your soul has become a little bit too powerful if you committed this type of action? The assault or injury that you produce or cause. The spirited side, right? Because now, not spiritual, Ella, but the spirited, a little different. But yes, the spirited part of you, the passionate and prideful part that hates disrespect, that wants to be honored, and that wants to exhibit its ability and skill. That would be the spirited part of you that's now become a little bit overactive and overcharged. If your reason was able to exert its authority, then it would be able to turn back the demands of your spirit. It would say, well, I know that you feel disrespected and slighted, but it's not wise to act on those feelings right now. So go with your better judgment. And when you do something bad later on and you have to justify yourself, you know, you're never going to say, well, it was the right intelligent thing to do. You end up saying things like, yes, it was unwise. It was a stupid thing, but I was caught up in the moment. I was overwhelmed by anger or passion, or my appetites and desires got the best of me. You know, I couldn't control them. So, you know, some people just indulge their appetites to no end and ruin their lives. Think of people that are drug addicts or just mindless pleasure seekers that end up feeling empty at the end. Some people cannot contain their emotions, whether it's rage or passion or pride, and that leads them in all types of unhealthy directions in life. But if you're steered throughout life by the proper captain within you, to use a phrase, the reason within you, the wisdom within you, then you will make neither kind of these bad decisions. So he just wants to make that point in his writing here, that bad and ill-considered behavior comes from the empowerment of the lower parts of the soul, which really should be in their own place, knowing their role, and not trying to lead. So let me go ahead and read about that from the book too. And so here's what he said. For example, if we had to come to an agreement about whether someone similar in nature and training to our city had embezzled a deposit of gold or silver that he had accepted, who do you think would consider him to have done it rather than someone who is not like him? No one, says Glaucon. So basically the question there is, Glaucon says nobody would think that a person with a just soul would have committed embezzlement. Furthermore, and would he have anything to do with temple robberies, thefts, betrayals of friends in private life, or of cities in public life? And no, nothing, says Glaucon. And he would be in no way untrustworthy in keeping an oath or other agreement. How could he be? And adultery, disrespect for parents, neglect of the gods, those would be more in keeping with every other kind of character than his. And Glaucon agrees, with every other one. And isn't all the cause of all this that every part within him does its own work, whether it's ruling or being ruled? Speaking of the person with a balanced and harmonious soul. Yes. Then are you still looking for justice to be something other than this? And he says, no. Then the dream we have had has been fulfilled. Our suspicion that with the help of God, we had hit upon the origin and pattern of justice. Absolutely. So justice is something of this sort. Now, the next little final statements in this essay, or in this piece of his book, discusses why, according to Socrates and Plato, it's not to your best interest to be unjust. So the question that that Socrates next asks Glaucon is this question: what if you could be unjust, but nobody know about it? You know, like, so could injustice benefit you as long as you were never caught? Do you kind of think you can understand that question? So the question is this: suppose that you could never ever be caught doing things that were considered unjust, like nobody would ever know and you'd never be held accountable. Do you think that then you could perhaps benefit from the injustice? Like, say a person wants to cheat on school exams to get a grade that they didn't really prepare for in terms of knowing the material. So they're going to cheat. Suppose they cheat and that no one ever finds out. The professor does not know about the plagiarism. That's just one example. Do you think that would benefit the person? Or the person like cheats in their relationship and it never gets caught? Could that benefit them? Or they commit theft, but nobody ever knows about the theft. Could this be something of benefit to the thief? Now, Eric, you're saying you think that that could be a benefit. I figure I understand why you would say so, because you might argue the only real disadvantage to doing those things is the possibility of being punished or being held accountable by others. But if that possibility doesn't exist, you might say, well, then it's just benefit to me without any consequences. Marissa, you have a different view. You say no because it encourages them to do it again. Perhaps, but what if you would never get caught in your whole life? That's what we're really asking about. In fact, there's a myth that the Greeks used to describe this whole dilemma. There is a ancient myth in the world of ancient Greece where they talked about the ring of Gyges. Okay, Trevor, I'll get your comment in just a minute, and Hugh, you also. But this ring of Gyges, just to give you a little context, the myth had it that if you had found this legendary ring, it would cloak you in invisibility. So you put the ring on, now you're invisible. Nobody can actually see you. Now imagine that, if you actually had this invisibility ring, what kind of temptations do you think you would have? Probably you'd be able to, you'd think about doing all kinds of nefarious things, right? To steal because no one could possibly catch an invisible thief, to, I don't know, eavesdrop on conversations that you're not intended to be a party to, and so many other things besides. So would it benefit the invisible thief to commit these actions knowing that they could never be detected? Let me see a few more of your ideas here. Hugh, you say yes in a practical sense, no in that it would inculcate guilt. Perhaps you're thinking that guilt would be the sort of self-imposed penalty. There is some kernel of truth to that, I guess, in the way that Plato thinks, but he doesn't exactly frame it in terms of guilt, but we'll get to his own response. Trevor, you're saying, I don't think so because the disadvantage is the morality and knowledge that you did such an action. Yes, there's something about that. It's interesting, Plato kind of talks about it as though there's an externally imposed harm on you, even if you don't perhaps it. So like your soul has been damaged. That's kind of what he says. So let me explain to you why he thinks that no, and you might not find it a surprise, but Plato says no, you do not benefit from unjust behavior, even if nobody ever knows about it. So let me clear the board so we have some room to talk about that. So the question was, does one benefit from unjust behavior as long as no one knows about it? And the answer simply that he gives is no, but let's understand why he says no. He says the reason that does not actually tend to your advantage. So if you're thinking about doing unjust things on the pretense that maybe I can just get away with it, and that's all that really matters, Plato is here to tell you that you're wrong about that. Even if you do get away with it and nobody ever finds out about it at all, you're hurting yourself. You're hurting yourself and you're actually making yourself worse off. So stop hurting yourself. Don't do those things. look for your own best interests, and it's not in your best interest to do unjust things, even if and when no one ever finds out. Why does it not benefit you? Okay, so because it basically corrupts your soul, and it puts the parts of the soul inside of you at war with each other, and it places them in competition with each other instead of having them live harmoniously and in a friendly situation with each other. To explain why he says that, he gives us a little visual metaphor to consider. So in the Greek thought, a lot of times we're asked to consider conceptual arguments by means of, elaborate metaphors and such. So this is just another case, which is kind of a trademark of philosophy from day one all the way up till now. So anyway, here's this little example. It's an example of a three-headed creature. Okay, so here we go. Three-headed creature example. So in this situation, I want you to imagine that we have a creature here, and it's got three heads. Now, one of the heads over here, it's kind of ambiguously described as like a bunch of little snapping gargoyle heads. So it's not really even just one head, it's like a section with like a bunch of little ones that are kind of like gargoyles described as, like little monster type things that are hungry and they all want to eat. So that's one of the heads, even though it's a multiplicity of heads, but just think of it as one section, right? Now over here, you have the head of a lion. You guys have seen that I have a cat, so it's kind of maybe sad that I don't have a better ability to draw a lion. But it's an attempt, okay? It's so just a perfectly drawn lion head over here to the right. And then the third one in the middle, that's just the human head. Okay? Human head in the middle, like a normal human face. Now what he says is this: I want you to imagine that these three heads are within this one creature, but to the outside world, to everybody else, they don't see all three. Even though inside this is really what's going on, externally, when viewed from a third-person perspective, they only see one of the three. Now, which one of these three do you think that ordinary people just see when they deal with this being? They just look on to him, and all they see is which one you figure. They just see which one of the three. Other people looking at this individual. When they see this person, yes, they just see the human head. So all they see is like a normal human image presented to them. But what's going on inside? Okay, well inside, let's imagine this. The gargoyles and all of them that are snapping and hungry and like feed me, they're attacking the human head and making him cower in fear, like and terror, because he's trying to slouch away from this threatening set of gargoyles snapping. On the other hand, though, the lion is also trying to bite him up, from the other side. So he's scared on both directions. He's got this lion kind of overwhelming him and attacking him, making him submissive and weak. And he's also got the gargoyles putting him in check, and like he can't do anything. So it seems like the human inside is actually doing pretty badly here. But everyone else that looks at him can't really tell. They can't tell the difference because they just see the normal human face. They don't see this like struggle for control and this battle among the internal parts of him. Now, these three different so-called heads are supposed to be symbols of the three parts of the soul that we just discussed. So let's see if you could come up with a quick guess as to which part of the soul each different head corresponds with. So what do you think are all those little snapping gargoyles that are like just trying to eat? Those stand for which part of your soul? Maybe. Well, there's an answer, but let's see what you think. The gargoyles are the appetitive part, right? They're distinguished by their appetites. They want to just eat, and they're just mindless appetite beings. On the other hand, the noble lion, right? The proud and noble lion, king of the jungle. That's supposed to signify which other part do you think of the soul? Well, Trevor, you're correct about the. Well, the rational part is the human head. Yes, that's right. I was going to go in a different order, but fine. Yeah, the lion is the spirited part, because we all have that sense of the lion being proud and wanting to kind of exhibit its ability and so forth and grace. Now, the human part is the rational part of you because it's a human being, and a human is a rational being in comparison to animals or little monsters, right? So here's what he says. There's a cost that you have to pay if you're going to be unjust. Even if nobody else knows that you're paying this cost, you do have to pay it up. And the cost is, the penalty is, that the parts of your soul are now out of order and are not peacefully cooperating with each other. The price that is the cost of unjust behavior is that you empower the lower parts of your soul so much that they just kind of drag the rationality within you along for the ride, and it doesn't have any ability to exert control or authority or influence. So take, like, I don't know, a drug addict, right? This is a person who's devoted their life just to the pursuit of the hedonistic pleasures of the psychoactive experience of the drug. And, you know, their reason within them, in fact, if you talk about people owned by the power of the desires and the addiction, that I could not act according to what my wisdom and rationality would have wanted. Now, maybe nobody knows about their, you know, habit. Maybe they conceal it so well from society that it doesn't get noted by anybody else. But they're suffering on the inside, don't you see? Because they've harmed their soul. They've weakened the best part of them, which is their wisdom, at the cost of enlarging the sphere of influence for this lower and subhuman part of them, which is just their base desires. So they're not living well, even if no one else can tell. So the sort of analogy here is that other people can't tell that this being is struggling when they just look at the human face and it looks normal. But if they could peer inside and see their actual internal situation, they would see that their soul is completely at war with itself. The part that should be in the lead role is not in the lead role. And the lower parts that should be basically submitting to it are now overthrowing him. And so he's basically in a tense internal struggle for control among the three parts of his soul. And so his life is not going well. The parts of them are at war with each other. But in a just life and a well-ordered and a harmonious soul, the parts all cooperate and thrive and complement each other. So another case, you know, if you are a person who keeps getting into fights, you know, you're so emotional and vindictive, I don't know, I guess a physical fight probably could lead to some accountability. But if you, let's say, committed a sequence of thefts and you kept getting away with it, and you kept on, I don't know, murdering people because they made you upset, and you just hid their bodies and no one ever found out about it, even if you did unwise and unjust actions. So, you know, you kind of enslave the rationality within you to the overwhelming power of your desires and appetites and your passions. And that's not the best way to live, even if nobody knows about it and even if nobody ever catches you doing bad things. So I'll read here from him, and you can kind of, again, compare our discussion to the book. So he says this. So he says this. Let's discuss this. Someone said at some point that injustice profits a completely unjust person who is believed to be just. Isn't that so? Glaucon says it certainly is. Socrates replies, well, then let's discuss this with him, since we have agreed on the powers that injustice and justice have. How? By fashioning an image of the soul in words, so that the person who says this will know what he's saying. What sort of image, Socrates? One like those images that legends tell us used to come into being in ancient times, such as the Chimera, Scylla, Cerberus, or any of the multitude of others. Yes, the legends do tell of such things. Well, then fashion a single kind of multicolored beast with a ring of many heads that it can grow and change at will, some from gentle and some from savage animals. So that's fashion one other kind, that of a lion, and another of a human being. But make the first much the largest, and the lion second to it in size. And he says, that's easy, sculpting is done. Now join the three of them into one so that they somehow grow together naturally. They are joined. Then fashion around them the image of the human being, so that anyone who sees only the outer covering and not what is inside will think that it is a single creature, a human being. Okay? Then he says this. If somebody maintains that injustice profits the human being, and that doing just things brings no advantage, let's tell him that he is simply saying that it is beneficial for you first to feed the multiform beast and make it strong, and also the lion and all that pertains to him, but then to starve and weaken the human being within, so that he is dragged along wherever I. That's what someone who is praising injustice is actually saying. But on the other hand, wouldn't someone who maintains that just things are profitable be saying, first, that all our words and deeds should ensure that the human being within the human has the most control? Second, that he should take care of the many-headed beast as a farmer does his animals, feeding and domesticating the gentle heads and preventing the savage ones from growing. And third, that he should make the lion's nature his ally, care for the community of all the parts, and bring them up in such a way that they will be friends with each other and with himself. And so that's exactly what someone that praises justice is saying. And so I think this is a powerful quote. Just after that, he says, from every point of view then, anybody who praises justice speaks the truth, and anybody who praises injustice is speaking false. And that is whether we look at the situation from the point of view of pleasure, good reputation, or personal advantage. A praiser of justice is telling the truth, but one who condemns it has nothing good to say and does not know what they're talking about. So if you have friends basically and people, I'm not saying you would, but if somebody had friends or people that were telling them, just cheat, lie, do corrupt things, and number one fact is that you just gotta make sure you don't get caught. If you can just cheat your way through things and never get caught, that's gonna be in your best advantage. What he's telling you is that anybody who's telling you to live that way does not have your own best interests in mind, because they're basically inviting you to corrupt your soul, which is the most lasting and harmful thing that you can do to yourself. And it's also, I think, kind of ironic, because if what he's saying is true, and unjust behavior costs you the internal harmony of your soul and therefore ruins your life in a lot of ways. If doing that harms you and yet you still believe that it's good, you just have a mistaken sense or conception of what's in your best interests. So people that invite you to do that are inviting you to ruin your life and to harm yourself. And so they're actually not really being your friend. A good friend would tell you that unjust behavior costs you, even if it's not a cost that is imposed by others. It's a cost that is necessarily imposed on you by yourself. So that's kind of weird, right? Like you're hurting yourself. Who can corrupt your soul? Nobody else can do that, only you. So this is a unique harm that only the individual is capable of committing onto themselves. Nobody else can corrupt your soul for you. I can't just go up to a person and say, hey, you, boom, your soul's been corrupted. I just did that. I can't do that. You have to be the one who takes decisions and takes actions on your own that are unjust and that undermine the rationality within you. So you should safeguard the harmony and just condition of your soul, not for the sake of others necessarily, although everyone does benefit and so does society, but for your own best interests as well. Because if you think that getting away with a bunch of bad behavior leaves you with a good and well-lived life where you're happy, you're going to end up being a little surprised when you find out that it just puts the parts of you at war with each other, and now you're constantly at doing the things that you're actually doing. So, you know, you're going to hurt yourself if you behave unjustly. And if you follow the counsel of people that tell you to do that, then you're following the counsel of people who don't even really care about what's good for you in the end. So be a just person. Now, I guess one other example that he makes after that is he says this. Let me ask you this question. Suppose that you could trade a loved one to people that want to torture and enslave them, but they would give you as much money as you wanted, right? So they just say, name your price. I just want to take your mom or something, or your brother or sister or your daughter, and don't worry what I'm going to do to them, but they're mine after that, and I'll give you whatever amount of money you want. Now, he says this. Do you think that would profit you? The gold or whatever that you would get in the exchange? Now, a superficial answer might be, well, financially, yeah, it would profit me. But we're talking about you as a human being in terms of like how good of a life you're living and the value of your life overall in a deep sense. And he says, no, of course that wouldn't benefit you no matter how much gold that you got, because you're enslaving a good person to corrupt and evil people. So no matter how much gold that you got, it actually would tend to reinforce how badly your life is going the more gold that you receive in that case. So when you sell out the reason within you in order to pursue your passions or appetites, when you set aside your judgment in order to go with these lower parts of your soul, you're doing something similar. It's like you're enslaving and making weak the godliest part of you that is wise for these animalistic and bestial parts of you that are not as wise. So I'll read that. He says here, in light of this argument, can it profit anyone to acquire gold unjustly if by doing so he enslaves the best part of himself to the most vicious? If you got gold by enslaving your son or daughter to savage and evil men, it would not profit you, no matter how much gold you got. How then can you fail to be wretched if you pitilessly enslave the most divine part of yourself to the most godless and polluted part, and accept golden gifts in return for a more terrible destruction? So there does he rest his case. Try to balance and harmonize the parts of your soul. Try to empower the wisdom and rationality within you to the highest point of authority. Do not allow the lower parts of the soul to exert undue influence over it, or to try and master and subdue it. Because if you do that, even if you are acting on the mistaken belief that getting away with it is all that really matters to your best interests, it's not to your best interests, and you're harmed either way, even when nobody finds out about it. And by the way, people might find out about it. Marissa, you say, wait, so does that mean there can be too much spirited and too much competitive, but not too much rational? Yes. Never too much reason. Reason's the leader. All deference should be given to the rationality within you, because it's like the king in the republic, and the kings are the authorities. They're not to be challenged, but they're there because of their demonstrated ability, not just because of their popularity. So you shouldn't be confusing king in the sense described by Plato in the Republic with political leadership as described in a democratic system. It's very different. And Plato was very insistent on that point, that democracy would not lead to the existence of these enlightened despots that are mentioned in the Republic. In fact, as he sees it, until we ever establish the perfect republic like what he's writing about, society is doomed to perpetually cycle through three different states: tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. And he thought that they would just give way to each other. So just one last word, I guess, about that in his political thinking. Until you establish the republic in the way he's described, you'll perpetually revolve between those other three states. So first of all, let's say there's an oligarchy where there's a few powerful people that exert control and influence over society. Eventually, they're going to return the power back to the people because of the popular demand for that, and then it becomes a democracy again. But over some period of time, eventually a tyrant wins power in the democracy and undermines democratic norms and just rules like a monarch would. But because they're not actually wise and rational, and because they were just appointed there by the tyranny of the majority, eventually the tyrant is overthrown, and it is a set of oligarchs that is able to wrest control away from him, which then return power to the people again, and we go in this perpetual cycle of democracy, which leads to tyranny, which leads to oligarchy, which leads to democracy again. And he thought none of these were ideal, and they all exhibit weaknesses. Eventually, if the republic is established, then that would be the most permanent, just, and stable society over the long run. Now, I mean, we don't all agree with everything you said, but it's an interesting view, and it's something that we've inherited from our ancient Greek ancestors in the West. So fascinating discussion, but it's not the last word. We have a couple of other authors. So I took 2 meetings, obviously, to go over this Plato with you guys. On Friday, we're going to talk about Jean-Paul Sartre's existentialist view about what makes a human life go well. That's a much more modern 20th century view, and it's a lot different than this. So we'll see about that. And then on Monday, we'll talk about Derek Parfit, and that's the last 2 authors. So it's going to be Sartre and Parfit, Friday and Monday. And then we're ready to start our reviews after that. So everybody, thanks a lot. I know that it's a long semester, but appreciate all your hard work, and we just have a couple more meetings to go. So have a good one. Take care, stay healthy, and I'll just see you guys back then on Friday. Bye-bye.